Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Brilliant Abyss, exploring the majestic hidden life of the deep ocean and the looming threat that imperils it. By Helen Scales. Narrated by Helen Scales.
For Josh, Sam, and David. Prelude. Standing on the mid-deck of the research vessel Pelican, I stayed well out of the way while I watched proceedings unfold below. The 35-metre ship had left port a day and a half before and wound its way in the dark night through the salt marshes of southern Louisiana and out into the warm, rolling waves of the Gulf of Mexico. Immediately, my world had shrunk. I was one of 10 marine scientists on board to run a series of studies in the deep sea, alongside 11 crew who ensured the smooth running of the ship. We gathered in the galley at mealtimes and sporadically to watch TV. There was also a small research lab, plus several staterooms, a grandiose term for the cramped 4-person cabins where I had a coffin-like bunk, which I learned to roll into and out of. There was also a shared bathroom, or head, as mariners are supposed to call it, with a sturdy horizontal bar to grab onto and hold yourself steady in a heaving swell. Waking up on that first morning, all that was visible outside, stretching to a horizon that encircled the ship, was the Gulf and its waves. Soon enough, though, the view would begin to reach much further. The machine was hanging from a crane above the back deck, waiting to be sent into the deep. Roughly the size of a small car, the deep-diving submersible was built around a tubular metal frame with bright yellow floats and an impressive payload of electronic gadgets and sensors strapped all over it. At the front end, 2 close-set glassy eyes gave the submersible an endearing face of an anxious robot. There were the stereo camera lenses that would become our eyes in the deep. It had a pair of arms, too. One was fancy, with 7-way jointed movements that would mirror the gestures of a skilled human pilot, controlling it from the ship. The second was operated by push buttons, giving it the simple instructions to rotate, grab, and let go. A long, ridged plastic tube, like a vacuum cleaner pipe, known as the slurp gun, would be used to gently suck up things from the deep and bring them back to the surface. A series of small propellers would maneuver the submersible up and down, left and right, and a cable as thick as my wrist connected it to a 1/4-ton stack of electronics, the clump weight, which in turn was connected via a very long cable to the ship, supplying power and instructions to the sub and relaying video footage in real time of everything it was seeing. There was no room inside for a human. All personnel would be staying on the ship. 4 people wearing yellow hard hats were hanging on ropes looped around each corner of the submersible, and like animal tamers they wrestled it under control as it swung across the deck and over the side of the ship, where it dangled expectantly in mid-air. If it had been a living animal, it would have known what was coming and strained at its leash, eager to return to the place where it feels most agile and free. Then the crane dipped its head and lowered the sub down until it floated on the sea surface and, in a satisfying sigh of bubbles, wallowed a short distance away from the ship. Looking down from my vantage point, I watched as the enormous winch clicked into gear and began to unspool the cable, lowering millions of dollars of sophisticated hardware into the deep. Monitor screens stationed around the ship showed the submersible's video feed and tracked its progress. First through bubbling blue water, with golden sargassum fronds floating by, then green water growing darker as the numbers ticked away, measuring the steady descent until the sub's headlights shone through the permanent dark. The submersible needed an hour to reach the seabed, a little more than 2,000 metres down. On the way, enticing glimpses of deep-sea life flashed past, hints of jellyfish and squid. But the submersible pilots had not been instructed to stop the vessel and watch. The first animal I got a good look at was swimming across the seabed. It was a translucent scarlet creature, sometimes called the headless chicken monster, because it is roughly the shape of a plucked carcass on a supermarket shelf, one that's been reanimated and flung into the deep sea. Officially called a nypniastes, it's a sea cucumber, And unusually for a holothurian, it's a part-time swimmer. Unlike its more sluggish relatives that loll around on the bottom, this one occasionally leaps into action and glides gracefully along just above the seabed, with sinuous undulations of its body flapping what looks like a flamenco dancer's ruffled skirt. An Hypniastes will drift with the current, then land back down to continue its ponderous walking and feeding. Its burst of swimming can be an escape response. This one may have got scared by the sub, or, alternatively, it was setting off in search of a freshly fallen flurry of food from above. With nutrition hard to come by in the deep, it pays to have ways of finding as much food as possible. And, like many inhabitants of the deep sea, an Hypniastes has evolved the ability to glow in the dark. When disturbed, it sloughs off an outer layer of illuminated skin, probably to confuse an attacker, creating a shining ghost of itself, while the real sea cucumber makes a getaway. But the sub's headlights were too bright for us to spot that phenomenon, and besides, there wasn't time on the schedule for watching sea cucumbers. For the next 12 hours, the scientists on board the Pelican took it in turns, 2 or 3 at a time, to step into the control room, a large metal box out on deck, and direct the submersible pilots as we set about our scientific tasks. All the while, we gazed via the monitor screens at the scene beaming up from 2 kilometres beneath our feet, each of us becoming remote explorers of the deep. The oceans have always shaped human lives, but the surface and the very edges have so far mattered the most. People have walked the coastlines and settled along the boundary between land and sea. They've sailed across the waves to gather food and reach distant lands, and to send armies and claim colonies and to fetch exotic riches. Still today, a great deal of food comes from the shallow surface seas, where highways transport many of the everyday goods that have come to dominate the global economy. And people still retreat to the edges of the sea to seek tranquility, to stare into the wild waves and escape busy lives. What lies far below the surface has long remained out of sight and usually out of mind. Now, though, humanity's close ties to the oceans are sinking deeper. This is without doubt a golden era for deep-sea exploration. Assisted by new technological tools, such as deep-diving submersibles, scientists are opening up a more expansive and intricate view of the deep than we've ever had before. Not so long ago, it was thought that no life existed there at all. But in fact, the deep sea is home to countless, unimaginable life forms. This is the domain of jelly creatures, so fragile they would fall straight through your fingers if you tried to pick one up. And yet they remain unperturbed by pressure so extreme it would squash your body's cells and molecules lethally out of shape. Here live billions and trillions of small glowing fish that spend their daily lives rushing skywards, then back down to the depths. Here lie entire ecosystems shut away in the dark that are based around the chemical powers of microbes, where worms are 3 meters long, crabs dance, and snails grow suits of shining metal armor. Studies of the deep are transforming the very notion of life on Earth, rewriting the rules of what's possible. This could well be where life began in the first place, and where it grew more elaborate and complex before moving off to inhabit all the shallower and drier parts of the planet. Not only that, as scientists look longer and harder into the deep, they're seeing just how much it matters. Invisible connections lead far and wide from the deep sea, keeping balance in the atmosphere and climate, storing away and pouring out vital substances, all processes without which life on Earth would become unbearable or impossible. Every living thing needs the deep. While deep-sea scientists are busy making remarkable discoveries, there is a growing urgency to know and understand the deep. What was once considered the very paradigm of untouched wilderness is increasingly feeling the influence and impacts of human lives as we collectively tighten our grip on the planet. At the same time, people are starting to ask more of the deep. Some are asking whether it can solve the problems facing humanity today. Can the deep feed us? Can it cure us? Will it save us from the climate crisis?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?